How can the Royals boost their outfield with who is still available? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, numerous other outlets, and you can find us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're that first-time listener, and it's the first time you're tuning in, well, we are doing 3 episodes a week, but that'll end on February 14th or 15th. We'll jump back up to 5 episodes a week. We'll be down there in Surprise, Arizona, giving you some spring training coverage. So if you're jumping in now, this would be the perfect time to do so, right as we are on the cusp of pitchers and catchers reporting and baseball season being right around the corner. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Well, as we know, it has been a quiet few weeks for Kansas City. Really, since they signed Michael Lorenzen, it's been radio silent on rumors, on any smoke out there, if the Royals would be interested in somebody. On the trade front, it's been radio silent, and we know that we're just a few weeks away from pitchers and catchers are reporting. But as I also brought up on Friday for our Mailbag Friday, which this week might be a little bit different. I'm going to be heading out of town on Friday, so I plan to do an episode today, tomorrow, and we either will do an early episode on Friday that I'll pre-record on Thursday, or we'll do a normal episode on Thursday, and I'll answer questions on Friday while I'm on the road. But again, that's for a little bit later on in the week. But we do know that pitchers and catchers reporting is just now a few weeks away. And we know that J.J. Picollo, as I brought up on that Friday episode, likes to have his team in place before they get to surprise. We have seen moments where he brings in guys last minute to compete in spring training. But for the regulars, I would say, the Royals almost always try to have that roster set by the time they show up, just so that everybody can get acclimated with each other. You can see them in the lineup. They get a full spring training where they're not left out of any workouts or any games. So if there was a move to be made, you're probably looking between now and February 10th or 11th, because I think pitchers and catchers report on the 12th. That first full squad workout, which we'll be in attendance for, is the next week on that Monday. So by that time, you would expect if the Royals are going to have any bullpen arms, they would want to be there before pitchers and catchers report. If there's going to be that middle of the order bat or a bench bat, you would think they'd like to be there before the first full squad workout. Sometimes it's not perfect. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and you have to bring in somebody you really want later on. But what everybody's been asking me about, what everybody's been talking about, has been this outfield, right? Can you run it back with the same outfield and expect progression, expect an upgrade from within, right? Because the Royals outfield, as it stands, is MJ Melendez in left, Kyle Isbell in center, and then Hunter Renfroe in right. The same exact outfield they had on opening day for 2024. As I've said multiple times, I have my doubts that's going to be the same outfield. I really have my doubts that they are going to run it back with the same outfield and no backup plan, right? Where you're just counting on MJ Melendez to have a career year. You're counting on Hunter Renfroe to stay healthy. You're counting on Kyle Isbell to be more than just a defensive center fielder. So it brought me to this segment of how can you boost this outfield without having to break bank or without having to give up a ton of prospects? How can you do it with who's still available? Well, we saw today that Austin Hayes, a guy that was definitely well-liked by some of the commenters out there. He had crushed left-handed pitching last year. Wasn't a great year for him. If you went back to 2023, far more of a valuable player. But in 2024, he took a step back, wasn't as healthy, but he continued to crush left-handed pitching. So I thought for the right price, Austin Hayes would make some sense for Kansas City. Defensively, wasn't that great, but I think you would have liked the platoon situation to go out there in left field. I think there are about two really solid names left that would make sense for a platoon in left field. So if MJ Melendez is somebody the Royals are counting on to be the main contributor 60% of the time this year. When facing right-handed pitching, MJ Melendez is out there with his new stance, which we'll dive into a little bit throughout the next few weeks every once in a while. Certainly when I get down there to spring training and I've got a in-person look at what that stance looked like, how the swing is, I'll be able to report back a little bit better. But if you're counting on MJ Melendez to have that career year, I don't think it's as simple as, well, let's give it another go. I think you have to have some relief there. And the two names I go back to are Mark Canha, who the Royals had interest in last year. He is going to be 36 years old, but going back to 2018, he's had an OBP north of 330 every single season. And last year, I think he did exactly what Detroit expected of him, and then he ended up the year in with San Francisco and the Giants and had a really good finish to the season. Not much of a defender. Again, you're basically just going after him for the numbers that he can give you in the on-base category. The Royals wanted a higher OBP clip from numerous guys in their lineup, and I wonder if Mark Canha is back on their radar because Austin Hayes being $5 million on a one-year deal makes me think Mark Canha is around that, if not a little bit less, because Mark Canha is 6 years older than Austin Hayes, and he's predominantly a left fielder and a DH. So I think that could make sense if you wanted to go into 2025 with the platoon situation out there in left field. MJ Melendez would sit against lefties. Canha, who does and always has hit lefties well, would be out there in left field. You kind of take the hit defensively for the bat. He's not a severe upgrade. He's around a league average bat. His OBP was north of 340 last year. I think that's fine in a 1 year, $5 million deal or a 1 year, $3 to $4 million deal. So Mark Canha, because of the previous interest, because of his age being a 1 year deal, wouldn't surprise me if that's one of the guys J.J. Picollo was targeting. Another name that comes to mind, and I read an article on ESPN this morning by Dave Schoenfield, was Harrison Bader, seen as a fit for the Royals and actually the top fit for Harrison Bader. And how I view Harrison Bader, I think at this point in his career, he's the right-handed version of Kyle Isbell. Okay, not a great on-base number. He walks less than Kyle Isbell. The power is more on Bader's side. I think he ran into 12 this past year, but he's one of the best defensive center fielders in the game. I mean, the Mets ran him out there, and the Mets got to the NLCS. They ran him out there a lot last year because of that defense. So the Royals weren't the only one that were really valuing defense over the bat in center field. But Bader does hit from the right side. The issue is he didn't really have great splits. He hit righties better than lefties last year, but I thought to myself, if Bader was in that 1 year, $4 to $5 million range, I could see it making sense because you could platoon in center at that point, bank on the upside of Melendez. I know that's not going to be a popular take, but you don't overexpose Kyle Isbell, who, like Melendez, didn't hit lefties very well last year. So even though Bader didn't hit lefties well last year, I think you just give that look from the right side, and then Kyle Isbell would be out there in center. You're not losing any defense with Bader in center. In fact, you could be getting better in a lot of areas in center field when lefties are out there. So I could see that making sense if they choose to go the free agent route. Again, the point of this segment is if they can't strike a deal through trade, which it seems like some of those prices out there are still pretty high. I'm holding out hope that the middle of the order bat can still be acquired in the next 2 weeks or so. But if they wanted to go the cheaper route and add to their bench a little bit, those are two guys that I feel like make the most sense. There are other names out there where you could be banking on them having a strong bounce back year, or they're going to be very cheap and they're an upgrade over Hampson or Frazier, because I don't think the Royals are going into 2025 expecting Brendan Shoemake and Kevin Biggio to be the replacements for Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson, because what Hampson and Frazier had over those two guys is they were on big league clubs for the entirety of 2023. Frazier was an everyday second baseman for a playoff-bound Baltimore team, and Hampson played a lot on the Marlins as well. And in fact, the Marlins team, that went to the postseason. Kevin Biggio bounced around with like 4 organizations, and you look at Brendan Shoemake, the only reason he's stuck in the big leagues longer than he should have was because he was playing for the White Sox. So it's not to take a shot at any of those guys, but I don't think the Royals are saying those are our guys. If they win a job in spring training, different story there. But I think those 2 names come to mind if they are going to do the platoon route. Trade, as I've gotten a few comments on, it's just so tough to predict one when we haven't heard any smoke on any trades of late. It could still happen, right? I know a lot of us out there are praying and hoping that Taylor Ward will end up in Kansas City because there was that previous interest. But it's clear right now the Angels are just not actively shopping him. A deal could still be done. And as I brought up on Friday, I think if the Royals do make a trade, it will be one that comes out of the blue. I don't think it'll be a slow burn like we've seen before, even like Jonathan India, where the Royals discussed a trade, then about a week later, that deal happened. That would surprise me a little bit if we got one of those this close to spring training. I think if a deal is going to happen, it's going to happen at the snap of the finger. So I do think that's still a possibility. I think those 2 names in free agency, though, are cheap and affordable. Yeah, there are some other names out there like a Tommy Pham. I'm not going to put it past Kansas City because they liked him and he seemed to mesh well with his teammates. Kevin Pillar, somebody that's had some success over the past few years. Again, these aren't the sexiest of names out there, but I think they would be some good value bats off the bench if they chose to platoon or if they just chose to lengthen out their depth a little bit and have guys that can get on base. All right, we're going to take our first break. When we come back, does Bobby Witt Jr. get disrespected? We'll dive into it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first and only sponsor today in Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I knew numerous people that were going to the Chiefs and Bills game, and I urged a few of them to go over to Gametime because it was going to be so simple in getting their tickets for such an awesome game, which it ended up being. You knew it was going to be close between the Chiefs and the Bills, but what a thriller it was at Arrowhead Stadium on Sunday night. Now you could be looking for tickets for the Super Bowl. You could be looking for opening day tickets. Maybe you're looking for March Madness tickets. The way to go is Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. This is more of a humorous segment, if you will, so bear with me because if you just tuned in on YouTube and you saw the second segment, you're probably wondering, who's disrespecting Bobby Witt Jr.? How is that even possible for a guy that is so loved in this league and has been seen as one of the faces of the league? And I do believe baseball has done a pretty good job of marketing its new stars. And in fact, I haven't even spoken on this really since Paul Skeens broke into the league. I think what baseball did with Paul Skeens was phenomenal. They didn't hold him down for the entirety of the season because he wasn't quote unquote ready or didn't have enough seasoning. Pittsburgh brought him up. Kudos to them. He made the All-Star team. He was the National League starter because his stuff is ridiculous and people wanted to watch that. And then today you see the MLB The Show, the new video game. I buy it every single year. They come out with the cover athletes. They were teasing it a little bit yesterday. So if you aren't into video games or you don't buy the show, this doesn't really apply to you. But they were having a lot of the young players, say they were going to be on the cover. Bobby Witt Jr. was actually one of them. But in the end, they picked Paul Skeens of the Pirates, Ellie De La Cruz of the Reds, and then Gunnar Henderson of the Orioles. I know right away Royals fans are going to be upset that Gunnar Henderson was picked over Bobby Witt Jr., but I will say I was a little bit surprised because this felt like the perfect opportunity, even colors-wise, because I thought some of the colors clashed on the cover. But I thought it would be a perfect time to put Bobby Witt Jr. at least as one of the shortstops on there. Look, I love watching Ellie De La Cruz play. I love watching Gunnar Henderson play. I'm one of those people, too, that doesn't get too caught up in it unless you have a list like the Shredder, which kind of led me to do this segment as well. where MLB Network has the algorithm. Bobby Witt Jr. was picked as the 4th best shortstop. And then a week later, you see that he's not a cover athlete, and 2 other shortstops that didn't have as good of numbers as Bobby are on the cover. I know it doesn't really matter to Bobby Witt Jr. What matters to him is winning baseball games, is winning an MVP, is being the best possible player that he can be. So again, it's kind of more of a silly segment, if you will. But I have started to wonder for his career how he will be approached, right? Because in baseball, we are drawn to the wow factor, right? I think Elly De La Cruz is a wow factor. He is 6'6". He's got a rocket of an arm. He hit a ball 123 miles an hour last season. He's a good defender. He's elite speed-wise on the bases. There's a lot of things he does very well, and he's a freak, and people watch him. They tune in to watch him, and I think baseball's done a good job marketing that. Gunnar Henderson, same thing too, and I think what Gunnar has over Bobby is that he's just been on a good team a little bit longer, right? Bobby broke into the league in 2022, and that team wasn't very good. 2023, that team was really bad. So it was until his 3rd year in the league where Bobby finally got on the big stage of playing in October, was in a pennant race, and now everybody in baseball is going, man, he is a future MVP. He is one of, if not the best player in baseball. And all those things are going to be coming to Bobby Witt Jr. over the next handful of years. That praise, that spotlight ain't going anywhere because he wasn't a cover athlete or because he was number 4 on Shredder's list. But I look at how Mike Trout was viewed in his career, and I do think there's some similarities beyond the swing that Bobby Witt Jr. has to Mike Trout. They're both very soft-spoken, and I don't mean quiet in their cadence or anything like that. They just don't say a lot of controversial things. When they do say something that's kind of, I don't want to say out of line, but you get what I'm saying. That's not their typical, conversation. It's not their norm, if you will. It's fun. It's silly. Bobby Witt Jr. would say, the boys are playing some ball. And that was trademarked the rest of the year for the Royals. And it was great that it came from a star. Mike Trout was somebody that was just so humble, didn't really bat flip anybody, played the game hard. He was every old school baseball player's favorite player because he didn't do the extra stuff that a lot of other baseball fans like. Bobby Witt Jr., you'll see him do the occasional bat flip. You'll see him celebrate. I'm not saying he's got no personality because he does. But I think baseball, when they're trying to find some of these guys that they're showcasing, you would go, well, Jazz Chisholm was on the MLB The Show cover a few years ago because he was in Miami. He had all kinds of accessories. He was flashy, did the bat flips. Baseball wants to promote that. They want to do that with a handful of the players. But again, that's a video game we're talking about. And the Shredder list, if you're still upset about it, don't be. Because what baseball should do is embrace all these great stars. It should be promoting the future of the game. Paul Skeens is going to be the future of the game. Elly De La Cruz is. Gunnar Henderson is. But that kind of goes hand in hand with my Bobby Witt Jr. argument. You can't really say Gunnar Henderson is super flashy and out there. I think they're kind of one and the same. They're very respectful in interviews. They don't say anything that's too crazy. They just keep their head down and play really good baseball. But to see some of the comments out there for people that are buying the video game that follow along with MLB The Show, there was a lot of pushback going, how do you not have Bobby Witt Jr., the best shortstop in the game, not on this cover? Felt like a missed opportunity. But I think overall, to baseball fans, to even the national media, to people that talk about the game, he's not disrespected. In fact, he does give that wow factor to the game because you can make many cases that he's the most complete player in all of baseball. Speed, power, contact, glove. He's got the 5-tool arsenal, right? And now he's on a team that, alongside a great rotation and Salvador Perez, those guys carried that team to the postseason and got to go up against the Yankees. So I do think more of that is to come. Sometimes, though, in baseball, you just might not be on every single commercial. We've seen Bobby Witt Jr. on a couple of commercials. I think he's on the Bank of America one with Patrick Mahomes. But sometimes, the quiet guys, they're not always on the face of the commercials or they're not always being interviewed. And baseball, as we've discussed many times before, it has a marketing problem and they're trying to get past that. They're trying to promote the biggest stars in the game. Now, that also means promoting stars that are quiet, are pretty humble, that don't bat flip or don't do this and that. And I am actually pro bat flip. I am pro celebration. The game is fun. I mean, Junior Caminero last night in Game 7 of I'm blanking on the series, what they were calling it. But in Game 7, it was just phenomenal. Juan Soto was in attendance. I watched a little bit of it, and the celebration on the ninth inning home run, it was ridiculous, right? And baseball is a game. It should be treated as a game. Not to say you can't get out of line a few times, but I love guys having fun playing baseball. I've always been on that train for that. I'm also that if you do disrespect the game a little bit, you might expect some retaliation because that's the way the game has been played and probably will always be played. But for Bobby Witt Jr., I don't think get it twisted. Just because a shredder list or a video game cover doesn't have him on there doesn't mean he's not being appreciated enough. And I don't know if he'll go as far to acknowledge it in the regular season because those things I don't think truly matter to him. I think he knows how talented he is, and his focus is on other things like winning games, like getting back to the postseason and getting this team a little bit further. So I know we are just weeks away from seeing Bobby Witt Jr. in action, but I know a couple people were pretty upset with that today, so I wanted to dissect it a little bit in a segment for today's show. All right, before we wrap up the show, want to talk about a player from last year's team heading back to his old stomping grounds. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The last segment we're going to dive into here involves a player from last year's team finding another home on a major league deal. That's right. Adam Frazier is going back to where he was an all-star in 2021 in Pittsburgh with the Pirates. I doubt it will be as an everyday player. I'd imagine he will fill a similar role that he played with the Royals in 2024. But I'll say it again. I don't think there was ever going to be a reunion in Kansas City. I think they knew that after the season ended, that guys like Paul DeYoung, guys like Robbie Grossman, guys like Tommy Pham, guys like Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson, some of those one-year deal guys and those they acquired, after the deadline, they were just going to let them walk because what Frazier signed for today, the Royals could have done. But the Royals, I think, are trying to go a different way in how they assemble their roster. I get there's going to be some comments of, well, when are they going to assemble that roster? Which direction are they going? Because not that you wanted Adam Frazier back, but they've been pretty silent on adding some offensive options other than Jonathan India. And Jonathan India was through trade. Yeah, they brought in Kevin Biggio. Yeah, Joey Wiemer was a part of that deal, which kind of ties back into that first segment about why I doubt Harrison Bader is truly on the radar, because I think they want Joey Wiemer to be their right-handed platoon for either Melendez or Kyle Isbell out there. But he's also got a long ways to go as well. He's not a seasoned guy at the big league level. But for Adam Frazier, I do think it makes sense for Pittsburgh, just because when you're looking at bench bats, it made sense for the Royals last season, when they were trying to piece together their depth, and they knew that in 2023 off the bench, they had a huge depth problem. And Adam Frazier had his moments. I said one of my underrated favorite moments of 2024 was Adam Frazier's go-ahead home run in Anaheim right before the Royals went on a tear in the month of May. He also had that rob in Detroit. He actually started that rally in Game 3 of the ALDS at Kauffman Stadium where Michael Massey had the triple to tie the game. It was Adam Frazier that got on with 2 outs and nobody on, even though it was an error on Anthony Volpe. He had that go-ahead hit in Washington, the very final 2 series of the year. Royals desperately needed that sweep against the Nationals to keep pace with everybody else in the wild card picture. And that series finale, he had that hit in the 9th inning that pretty much cemented everything for that team. And, Adam Frazier did not live up to even that 1-year contract. It was not a good season statistically. He hit 202. His slug was below 300. And that's why I think it made sense for the Royals to go, all right, we're going to need a little bit more than that from our super utility guy, because Frazier could play a lot of positions, and I think that's why Pittsburgh liked the idea of Adam Frazier again. Maybe it's the nostalgia. I mean, remember the Royals back in 2021, they went out there and reacquired, or was it 2022, when they brought back Holland and Davis and Dyson? Like, there's a little bit of nostalgia to it, but it wasn't just to appease the fans. There is value in somebody that can play multiple positions and do some of the little things right. That's not going to come across maybe the best way to some people that really didn't enjoy it, what Adam Frazier was leading off, or he was in the lineup, or he was pinch hitting. But teams and front offices still in this day and age of baseball value that versatility. And when you've been around the league for so long, you're not really gambling on what a guy could be, right? The Royals may go into spring training and Nick Lofton wins that job. He wins the job that Garrett Hampson had, because Nick Lofton is the perfect example of the super utility guy who's been blocked in his big league career. He's not an everyday player, but last year they elected to go with Hampson and Frazier over somebody like Nick Lofton. But even when Nick Lofton was up in Kansas City last year, we didn't really see that consistency. There were moments, there were flashes, and he is a first-round pick, but he never was able to stay. So why I think the Royals may still bring in a bat or two to fill those holes is that if you're trying to compete once again and get back to the postseason, you want to limit how many people you're gambling on. And that can even be on a small role like the backup infield or the backup utility guy, because sometimes injuries happen and you want to be able to trust somebody to take over and be that everyday player. And Adam Frazier coming to Kansas City maybe had something to do with some of the back flare-ups that Michael Massey was having. That's not going to be an issue this year, because if Michael Massey had back flare-ups, well, Jonathan India will be the second baseman. If he doesn't, Massey could always move to the outfield. That's another thing I'm going to circle back on with that first segment. MJ Melendez may not be the everyday left fielder, because what if it's Jonathan India? What if Jonathan India is the left fielder and Michael Massey the second baseman? As I've said before, they could make it work out there with India and Massey. India could DH, Massey's at second, Bobby Witt Jr. is at short, Michael's at third, and Melendez is in left. They can make that work because Vinny can play first base. Salvador Perez is catching. He wouldn't be DHing. And so you could make it happen that way. But if there's days where Jonathan India is out there in left field, well, then MJ Melendez isn't going to right, and maybe he DHs, maybe he doesn't. But a part of those injuries, like I said with Massey, and why Adam Frazier was valuable to them, was that on opening day, they went with Adam Frazier because he was somebody for a playoff team that played a lot of games the previous year. And for Pittsburgh making this move, I think they saw Adam Frazier appear in a lot of games for a team that the Pirates probably aspire to be this year. I'm not saying that the Royals are the model, but I think a lot of teams that missed out in the postseason that felt like they were just to play or a series or two away, they just make tiny moves like this where you have more reassurance. And maybe that's stupid, because guys that are just not good statistically, that clubhouse impact or the veteran impact, it doesn't mean much if you hit 190, right? Because you're not doing enough on the field, and it's a business about winning. However, it kind of came back to what the Royals were looking at when they brought in Adam Frazier back in 2023. They weren't sure what Nick Lofton could give them. They didn't expect Adam Frazier to hit 200 and have a slug that was below 300. But I think the uncertainty of Nick Lofton, and what if he comes up here and he's totally overwhelmed and he hits 150? Well, we would take the 202 average at that point. Just if it's a slight increase, it's a narrow edge here over our opponent. And that's what I think big league teams do. I think it's more so about trying to have that depth, that versatility. If you have a pinch hitting moment late in the game, you can trust Adam Frazier to play second, third, left, right, first base, something like that. He's not really that quick. He's at the tail end of his career, but I can see the logic behind it. I wasn't a huge Adam Frazier supporter, but I always try to make sense of moves like this, especially since some might be happening for the Royals before spring training. You have that defensive versatility. You've done it for a long time at the big league level. That's going to have value to somebody in a front office. And it sometimes is the right move over a guy that you might like the numbers of in AAA, but they've never really done it at the big league level. So Adam Frazier stays in the big leagues. He's going back to where he was an all-star in 2021 with the Pittsburgh Pirates. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow with more offseason news, but until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.